welcome everyone. Survey 3, we will be talking about the purpose of our surveys are, specifically honing in on the concept sets and cohort definitions of Atlas at this community call. Just for a quick agenda, some of this is going to be repeated throughout the different presentations I'm giving, but I just want everyone who's late to the party will have a little context. So we'll do a quick Atlas, what is it? Status of the 3.x and 4.x planning. What we need from you. We'll review our survey 2 responses and introduce survey 3 with the demo from Rich. Okay, so just to recap what Atlas is the web-based application enabling non-programmers to design and fully specify elements that can be used in observational studies. It is our primary interface for developing and evaluating cohort definitions. These functions that we have are vocabulary searching, concept sets to build code lists, cohort definitions to identify patient populations, characterizations that can yield incidence, pathway analysis, and proportions, and other analytics such as population level estimation and patient level prediction. Our development status on Atlas is the 2x line of Atlas is at end of development, but it will be maintained for current users and hot fixes will be accepted. The 3.x is under development, and it's going to be based on the community feedback, which is being yielded from the surveys, the series of surveys that we're giving to the community to help us focus on what to carry forward and where we want to put our energy and resources towards. We want those important frequently used features to take priority. We're also going to be performing technical updates. That is just a very long overdue need in our code base, so we'll be making that effort in the 3.x line as well. The 4.x line will make changes to the application design based on user interviews and data collected by an organization, Data for Life. Some of you may have already interacted with them and performed interviews about how you work, but the 4.x will be a much broader change to reimagine how we want to be interacting with our web tools. So what we need for you, we will be showing you the set of features in the Atlas 2 line up to version 2.14, and we need your input about frequency and use of importance of the features. On the slide, I'm not going to read it, but they describe the frequency of the use from never to often and how important it is to it's not an important feature to an extremely important feature. Feedback from these surveys will determine which aspects of the application get priority. Okay, this is survey 2 responses. This was about an hour ago. I think we got another response in the last hour. This top graph is from survey 1. This is the first survey, if you recall, dealt at a very high level of just the sections of Atlas, basically iterating through each nav, data sources, search, etc. And so what we're drilling to on this survey, the latest survey, is going to be on data sources and searching. I pulled these reports from the 2 sections of the survey, data sources and vocabulary exploration. We can see a fairly balanced use of these reports from some people will use it frequently, others people not so frequently. Interesting data point here is that the condition error is not something that seems to be frequent or considered important. I believe that's because mostly condition error is a very tight or close approximation to what's happening in the current condition occurrence anyway. So probably people just go directly to condition occurrence. Similar things could be said for drug error, but maybe there's a little bit more frequency importance on that one because people appreciate that drug error reports are rolled all the way up to ingredients. And so you'll only be ingredient level stuff in that report versus the underlying branded concepts that might be rolled up into ingredients. Otherwise, interesting distribution of importance and use, frequency of use on all these reports. So very interesting. From a vocabulary exploration, a vast majority of people will be doing finding their concepts through searching. Although we have less often than used advanced search, people generally think it is an important feature though, even if it's not as frequently used. Some people have created concept sets through the text search, which is interesting, and consider that an important use of the tool. Filtering is an important function for narrowing down large lists of concepts into the concepts that you like. Using concept counts from Achilles is an important element of their of navigating the vocabulary to find those concepts that might be most impactful to your studies. And choosing different sources to see different record counts is also something that people find that they frequently use, and it's important. So I think we can safe to say that vocabulary exploration and which data sources is a aspect of that is absolutely a critical core cornerstone functionality of Atlas, and that will certainly be something that we'll want to put a lot of energy into improving through the 3.x line. Okay, shifting gears onto the next survey, survey 3. Concept sets and cohort definitions. Two main parts of survey 3. We're going to review concept sets, which is just basically the tabs on the concept set section of the Atlas, walking through each element and describing its high level purpose. And then cohort definitions will be the same thing. We will have those tabs and talk about how those are used and how they come to create cohort definitions. And there is overlap between, is a concept set section on the cohort definition section, which we will just kind of ignore because we are going to cover that in the direct concept set section itself. I should actually say not ignore. I think there's one element of a question that asks about if you create embedded concept sets only. I think it was just a curious question about how many people are creating general concept sets from a repository and importing them into their cohort definition versus I create a new cohort definition and I create a de novo concept set directly there. So that is one of our questions, and it'll be interesting to see what the feedback is on that use case. Okay, Rich, if you're ready, I can hand it over to you and let you go ahead and go through the demo.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
How's the screen share?
Looking good.
All right, thank you. All right, it's a real pleasure to be here to try and help out with demonstrating some of the concept and the functionality of the Atlas tool. So I'm just going to walk you through initially the concept sets feature, and then I'll work on a little walkthrough of the cohort feature. We're not going to go into any great depth. We're just going to try to show each of the little pieces. So as you do the survey, you'll know or have seen at least what it refers to. So I'm on the concept sets component of Atlas. You can see in my shop, we have used Atlas quite a bit. And so there's several, sort of organized sets of concept sets that we're working here. I'm going to pick one that I was playing with this morning, which I think should be pretty useful to look at. So our intention here, we're trying to build a concept set for long-acting benzodiazepines. And on the first tab, we have the concept expression. This concept expression, we probably manually sort of piece together the different benzodiazepines that we are interested in. We'll see it's a mix here of ingredients and clinical drugs, probably some branded drugs in there. And we're not using any of the features that you can use when you're defining these concept expressions. Like, for example, we're not excluding anything or selecting descendants or selecting mapped, because we actually probably worked with our pharmacists and we knew exactly the drugs that we wanted to include in this list. But these features are available for you as you define concept set expressions, and they're very, very useful. Next tab over is going to be the included concepts. So the concept expression gets resolved. For example, if you selected descendants or you selected mapped, there's going to be some SQL that's going on in the back end, hitting the vocabulary and pulling back things that are identified by the relationships that you specified. And another nice thing about this, there's actually several nice things that we like about this. So one, we have our setup so that we can see record counts and descendant record counts. The difference being a record count would mean that there's a record where the specific concept, like in this case, clonazepine, is actually the code that's used in the drug exposure table. And the descendant record count would mean that there's children to that concept. And so maybe clonazepam being an ingredient would have some clinical drugs that are going to be a child of that concept. And then we also have PC, which represents person counts, and descendant person counts. One of the things you can see from that is that the person count number is quite smaller compared to the record count, which means there's probably more than one for most patients, a record of that. So this kind of information is really useful. And there's filtering features over on the side. I can filter down to see things that are just the ingredients or just the clinical drugs. I can filter out everything that doesn't have a actual descendant count or record count. Nice ways for you to both quality check, do some sanity, make sure that these things are going to work in your data when you're trying to run your query. Included source codes is really, really useful when you are checking to see that the concept that I create, is it relevant to the kind of data that I might have gotten in the source of the information, but that got ultimately mapped into the common data model. So the common data model sort of specifies that there's certain standard vocabularies, like RX norm is the standard vocabulary for drugs, but the hospital system, for example, may primarily have NDC codes. We've run into that problem oftentimes. So by going to included source code, I can take my sort of RX norm specified concept set expression, and then I can go and see, well, what does that cover in terms of NDC codes that would have been used in the hospital system and ultimately mapped into the tables that I'm using to run this. So this is a really useful tool here as well. Now, this is with drugs. The same concept applies for conditions. If you were dealing with conditions and you had to work with ICD codes, ICD 9s or 10s or what have you, most likely it's going to be SNOMED in the common data model. You're going to want to come over here and see, did I get the original ICD codes that I was interested in when I look at the included source code. Recommend is a feature that by default isn't necessarily turned on, but with just a small amount of configuration, you can upload a table, and that table has been derived through an analysis of many, many different data sources for the utilization of codes. And then what it will do is it will suggest to you, based on that prior analysis, possible codes that you might want to look at to include in your concept set. That project was called Phoebe, and so you can identify where the data tables are for that and upload them into your common data model, and then that enables the functionality that you see right here, in which case you can go ahead and modify your concept set expression by clicking through the recommendations, and then they get added onto there. Explore evidence is a wonderful feature for those folks who use negative controls in their observational retrospective studies. So negative controls, for folks who may not be aware, it's just this idea that there's bias in observational data sets. And if you have a question that you're going to ask about an association between, let's say, a drug and a condition of some kind, having some drugs that are known to not be associated with that condition or have a high likelihood of not being associated with that condition allows you to look at things like, how many false positives am I going to get from this data set, and how much does that mean that I have unaddressed bias? So the Explore Evidence is a feature that we developed a number of years ago so that you could generate negative controls specific to the condition or the concept drug exposure that you were interested in. This one, I do not have the tables that are loaded that are required to run this. But if I had that feature enabled and the data tables loaded, I'd be able to utilize that. Export is a way of taking that concept set expression and exporting as JSON. We all want our data and research to be reproducible. So making things reproducible means that you need some kind of a structured way to be able to share this outside of the tool that you're using. And that's exactly what this gives you. So it's really nice, simple way just to click that and be able to share it. You just go down to the bottom. I use this thing oftentimes where, maybe I'm writing a SQL query against the database on the back end. I have a concept set that's defined in Atlas, and I kind of want to get those codes over into the SQL query. So just clicking on that, I can copy over the concept identifiers, and I can put it in an in statement or something like that. So that's a really useful tool as well. In terms of importing, also another thing, this happens in my lab because we have different instances. We have some that we're using to collaborate with other institutions. Sometimes we're going to copy one from one instance to another instance. We can do that by taking the concept identifiers and pasting them here, and then adding to the concept set. We can bring in the source codes. We can bring in the concept set JSON, or we can go and we can navigate through our repository of other concept sets and bring those in. So this is a way that you can import these things and work with them. Compare, this is something I didn't have enough time to set up, but I could have used it in this situation where there's, for example, another concept set that used the ATC hierarchy to come back with long-acting benzodiazepines. Maybe I want to compare that with what our pharmacists said are the right ones to utilize, and just see, is there anything I want to come back at them and say, hey, well, did you miss this one possibly because it's in the hierarchy of ATC? I could have done that if I had a second concept set loaded here, and then it will come back with a report that I could then use to compare with here. So another really valuable tool. Annotation, I actually haven't used annotation. I don't know what it's for? I don't know. Sorry, Chris, can I put you on the spot here? What's the annotation tab?
Yeah, it's no
for?
problem.
I don't think
Actually,
I've
this
utilized
is I think you're looking at a preview release of Atlas. Just to briefly say what annotations is, it records things about when you add concepts to your concept set, where they came from what search happened. However, that's in a pre-release right now. So probably the only two tabs you want to, yeah, it's not in the survey. So the annotation and result mappings aren't. So probably just want to talk about versions and messages.
We'll skip over that then. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, so versions we have, it's important, of course, if you're making changes in your provenance of your research study, you can save things and version them and be able to go back to specific versions if you made a change that you weren't satisfied with. So that's one of the features that we allow in here. And then messages, this one doesn't have any messages, but there's some sort of sanity checks that are automatically ran on a concept set, which allow for you to see, does the system report to me anything I might want to pay attention to and fix? So messages is a nice way for the system to give you some feedback on what you're building. So that's my demonstration on the concept sets. I'm going to close that out now and go to the cohort definitions application. You'll see similar to concept.
Can I interject? I think there's one other feature related to the survey, and if you wouldn't mind going back into that, there's the optimize button.
Oh, I apologize.
Yeah, no problem.
Let me see here. I got to go back to the right one again. Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, this button up here. Okay.
That's the one. Yep.
Okay. So that's since you got our attention on it, can you talk about briefly what that does?
Sure, absolutely. So the optimize button, sometimes when you're creating a compilated concept set, you'll start with some base concept set, and then you'll include children, descendants. And then as you're navigating through searches and exploring the vocabulary, you might add more concepts to your concept set expression. Inadvertently, you may have included a child that was already covered by a parent's descendants, and optimize will remove any redundant concepts you have from your concept set expression. So that's effectively what the feature does in a nutshell.
Thank you. Appreciate you filling me in on that. And then also, just while we're up here, we can see that we can copy the concept set, and we can also add a tag to it, which are all useful for both, sharing concept sets, editing them, or keeping track of them and organizing them. All right,
I think Rich, on this example, actually, I think it's a good one to kind of just illustrate that. In your concept set, you've selected a range of different RX norm concepts, and some of them are like ingredients, and some of them are clinical drug concepts, and you've got kind of a range of things there. That can absolutely be appropriate if you know the specific items that you want to pick. Sometimes people want to do things like, for example, select diazepam plus descendants, and they don't necessarily know all of the clinical drugs or all of the source codes that are going to roll up to that. So that would be an example where the optimize could be helpful, because you would learn that some of these things are truly children that you didn't need to redundantly specify in that case. So that can help you with making a more parsimonious concept set. Like in your case, maybe it instead of being 38 entries, that ends up being like 3 entries for the key ingredients that you care about.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. Are we ready to move on?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So for cohort definitions, again, I'm going to pick one of the many that we have in our research lab here. So it's related. So this is going to be something related that has to do with the shorter intermediate benzodiazepines. Again, this is just for demonstration, but a little bit about this concept that we're using this as a way to identify potentially inappropriate medication exposures based on some criteria that's been published called the Beers criteria. So the main thing that we land on here, the first thing we see is we have a logical definition of this specified using these form elements that are in here. Hold on just a second. So what we have here is, first of all, our cohort entry event is where we can specify an initial event, and we can go across the different domains where information about the patient cohort can be specified. I like to tell people in my lab that these correspond pretty directly to the tables in the common data model. So if you understand the tables, these are the kinds of things that you're going to be sort of pulling from to define your definition. And then once you pick something like, for example, a drug exposure, these things sort of correspond to the columns of the tables, more or less. So if you understand the columns, and then you read the business rules of the columns, you'll understand things like, oh, there's certain standard vocabularies here, or there's certain kinds of things that I might want to know about this. Now, there's a lot going on here, including the ability to add nested criteria. Things can get quite sophisticated, and we've seen some very complex definitions. This one's pretty simple in how it's set up. There's so much expressiveness in sort of the form-based approach here, which we're not going to go into the details on during this call. But there's a great deal of things where you can have numerous criteria. You can have criteria with sub-criteria. You can specify look-back periods. You can specify windows of observation that are required for each individual person. You can say things like, I want all events, or I want the earliest event, or I want the latest event. And you can set up additional restrictions on the initial event, which is really important as you're starting to think about, who's going to be the cohort that I'm going to be working with. And then for the inclusion criteria, and here we only just have a simple single inclusion criteria. But basically, imagine subsetting that data set from the electronic health records down to a set of folks that are qualifying to be in your study, and then now go through and apply the inclusion criteria, which is a way of filtering out those people that you would not necessarily include due to the restrictions on your study design. So here we can, again, similar to up above, add different criteria based on sort of the corresponding to the tables in the common data model. Once you pick something, in this case, we're doing a conditioned occurrence, we're going to be able to select from different things, which more or less correspond to the columns. Foreign keys sort of matter. So like something related to a visit, there's a relationship in the table that points to another table, which you might utilize to set up the kind of visit that you're interested in capturing. Again, a lot of sort of things that you can use to adjust or fine tune how that works. Now there's a cohort exit criteria. So maybe everybody has an observation period in your data set, but you might also want to basically have people drop out because of fixed amount of time. You might want to have it relate to the drug exposure itself. So if there's a start and an end to the drug exposure that's an entry event, you might use that. Or you might want to censor on certain things. For example, you might want to use the death table as a way of censoring out folks from that. And then, that's a great way to set up a logical definition for this. Go and save it after you make any changes. Now, one of the things that was referred to earlier, Chris mentioned, is that there's a concept set tabs here. And the way I like to think about this is that when you're adding the concept sets, you have the ability to import concept sets. In which case they're going to be things where you can bring in the concept identifiers. You can use included source codes. You can bring in the JSON definition of something you'd like to add. Any of those things are going to be helpful to you to define or import a concept set. You can also specify a new concept set. And then there's some tabs that'll show up right there. For example, again, you can go in here and to the import tab, and you can select to enter your concept identifiers and work with those. Or you can import from the repository. So you can maybe have something you want to start with and then improve it, or start with it and clean it up. But the thing that you need to know, I think everybody should know this, is that this is a deep copy. If you're bringing something from the concept set location, it's actually going to get copied into the definition for the cohort. And what that means is that if you only use the cohort definitions interface to define a concept set, it doesn't get stored back into the library unless you explicitly make that happen. It's going to just stay within your cohort definition. There's a big advantage to doing this in that the cohort definition is fully contained. So all the concept sets are a part of the logic, and that's great for reproducibility and for provenance around a study design. But if you're trying to utilize concept sets to sort of manage concepts and keep that as a separate thing related to cohort definitions, you have to be aware of that. So I'm only going to focus now on just one of the concept sets that we imported and used in here. This one's just around acceptable conditions. And here again, it's very similar, sort of a repeat of what you see in the concept sets. So here we can look at, again, what are the included concepts based on my expression. I'm not using any sophisticated logic here. I just have some things that we handpicked. Notice there's some color changes here that you'll have in terms of this. So some of these things, so they might be red or they might be purple. That's related to whether something's mapped or it's non-standard. So a lot of times those things are used. We might want to actually use probably a mapping on that one, I think. In our included concepts, included source codes, here it's doing a query because it's pulling back and saying, okay, of the things you selected, what was the source? You can see how we went back to ICD codes here, as I was mentioning before. It's a very useful feature for double checking things. But I'm also saying that I'm not getting any record counts or descendant record counts on the specific set of things that we chose. We can still utilize the Phoebe recommendations. This is nice because it's pulling in some record counts that I might want to pay really close attention to as I build this thing. Again, remember, for all of these things on the left-hand side, there's a lot of facets that can be really useful for you to decide whether to include or exclude certain parts of the concepts that you're going to be using in your definition. And then no surprise, there's going to be the import and export features that we saw previously. Moving on to the generation tab, we have a few sources that are fully set up, and then we have one that's sort of pending in our environment right now. And so you can see that we actually took that logical definition, and once we are pretty satisfied with it and we save it, we can then go into this location and we can generate the concept set. And generate, what it actually does is it creates a job. The job is kind of ran in the background. You can go on and you can do other things in Atlas. That's a wonderful feature because some of those jobs can take a little while. And basically what you're going to get back is you're going to get back the person count and the records. And then if you click on, for example, one that's been generated, you can see things about the generation. For example, how well did the definition sort of line up as it was trying to find qualifying folks to be included. You can see how the inclusion rule sort of changed the original set of people who qualified for the cohort entry event and how much of an impact it had. There's a little visualization which illustrates sort of the difference between the cohort entry event and the cohort inclusion criteria's effect on that. The attrition view is a nice way to sort of just look at that sort of flipped a little bit. And you can compare this by person or by event, which just gives you two different perspectives on this. I think I haven't used this before, but I guess maybe Chris, you can comment on this. If you check the demographics checkbox, that's going to add some additional information to the report. Is that correct?
That is correct. And then that, again, is a 215 feature, so nobody will be asked about that on the survey.
Something to get excited by. I do see a question. Yeah. Do we want to answer questions while we go along here, y'all?
I will try to keep up with it in the chat, so don't you worry about that.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, moving on to the next tab. So samples. Samples is a wonderful thing that we use in our lab a lot, where we'll say, okay, you create a logical definition with these concept sets, you generated it. Now take a look at a sample of the people who qualified and take a look at their longitudinal record and just see if things make sense. And so by doing that, a lot of times you can improve your definition. You'll find edge cases, you'll find things that don't line up with the way you expected them to, which require you to go back and make a few changes. So with samples, you can add a new sample and you can specify when you add a new sample, what the name is, the number of patients that you want to draw from, up to 500. You can have just a handful of kind of small criteria that you can use to fine tune that sample. And then it'll run for just a second. It'll come back and say, okay, I created the sample for you. And then what you're getting back here is you're getting row level sort of information around the individuals that are in the data set here. And when you click on that, I'm not going to do that right now, but if you click on that, you'll see sort of a timeline, which will have dots representing for each of the data domains, the drugs, the conditions, the measurements, and so forth. You'll see relative to the cohort entry date, which would be time 0. You'll see when these sort of events happen in their record. So reporting is, imagine from a couple of weeks ago, we talked about data sources, and we went and we looked at data sources and we looked at various reports like the person report and the condition report and so forth. And that's sort of full data set characterization. Here, it's sort of a mini version of that that's applied to your cohort. So for example, I believe I set up a report earlier on this. So let's see if the person report will load. So for this definition, which is trying to find folks who have a potentially inappropriate exposure to short or intermediate benzodiazepines, I clicked on the quick analysis button. It told me, hey, that's going to take about 10 minutes to run. I said, yeah, go ahead and run it. And now with the drop down, I'm able to go ahead and see things about this specific cohort of folks, which I think in the PACE data set, I'll pop over to generation for just a second. I think it was about 31,000 folks that I see there. Sorry, hopefully that loads real quickly back up there. So now I know for that specific cohort, you know, their age distribution, some information around their demographics, and just like you might see, there's going to be other reports that I could generate as well, or that are going to be generated on my cohort. Like for example, their drug eras is going to show up here. There's another report called a tornado report. These are all really useful things for beginning to understand your cohort and try and sort of work with it and see what the you know, the exposure and all this sort of thing is to these. All right, so export. Now I go back and forth, and I tell people in my lab to go back and forth all the time between the logical definition and the text view, which you see here, because having a narrated description of your cohort is oftentimes really, really useful for debugging. Sometimes the logical presentation can get really complicated, and you just can read it here, in which case you can see if it makes sense or if you forgot to put something in there. This also, when you copy it to the clipboard, becomes something that you can retain in your protocol, so that as you're, you know, building up the artifacts for your study, this becomes something that's really useful for, you know, supplemental information around your study design. The text view is really great because it talks about the cohort entry, the inclusion criteria, other things, but it also carries in these appendices, which are going to have the specific concept sets and concept items or elements that were used as you constructed this. So there's a graphical view that you can look at. The graphical view is really useful and important when you're thinking about, you know, the longitudinal nature of the data and how is this cohort definition and inclusion criteria going to apply in that context. Does it make sense how it's been designed? The JSON is a way to preserve and share this information. It's also a way to load concept sets. There's a lot of times that, and I won't do it right now, but if I copy this to the clipboard and I opened up a new cohort definition, I could just replace the stuff that's in this text area and click reload. And that new blank cohort definition will automatically have all the logic and the concept sets that I had in this definition. And so that's very useful for, you know, branching and starting to sort of edit things. It's useful for sharing across instances of Atlas. Just copying the clip to the clipboard, the JSON, we also retain those JSONs for provenance around studies that we keep. We have a zip file that has like all of ours from the past. So we love that. And then we have the SQL tab here. And what we have here, a lot of times this is more useful for debugging if you're seeing something that's running a really long time against your data source, or you're not sure, you know, why you're getting back some results that you didn't expect to get, you know, back. You can look first of all at the SQL that's been templated. You'll see it's templated and that it has these @ symbols. This is something that's prior to running through SQL render. You know, SQL render is going to target a specific database management system. If I put in here the name of like the cohort table that's in my specific instance, it'll go through and it'll sort of flip the values there. This template by default, I think, is sort of a SQL Server representation. I think it's equivalent to the MS SQL, if I remember right.
Yeah, it's an Odyssey SQL dialect that we base all of our translations off of.
Yep. Okay. And then you can see the various other translations that we have here. Again, you know, most of my data is going to be stored in Postgres, so I'm going to go ahead and use that particular one, at least in my lab. But I work in another institution where, you know, we're going to use my SQL SQL Server, and other folks will be running with these other things. So all of this is useful. You can edit like which sources are going to go against. You can change these things, and you can copy it to the clipboard, put it into your SQL client, run it. I'll run sections of it and use it to debug stuff. Moving on to the next tab, we do have some versions on this. You can see this was created originally prior to us actually having authentication set up. And then from there, we started to track like who was working with this and what versions have they changed over time. And again, you can kind of go back and preview it, or you can copy back to a specific version, reinstantiate it, start working with it. And then as far as messages go, we can see there's some suggestions here. I actually have these, remember, as I was sort of demonstrating things, I created these 2 unnamed concept sets. So it's kind of cool because I can go ahead and just automatically kind of clean that up from this page. I'm not seeing any warnings or errors here, but I do see some suggestions for things for me to think about. So this is definitely the place you'll want to go and see, you know, are there any sort of system warnings or errors related to my specific definition that I need to pay attention to? Now, did I miss anything, Chris? Is there anything else that I should cover, or does that cover everything as far as this goes?
Very good. No, that's good. There is
All
also
right.
a function to tag on this, but that's
Like up here, you got your tag.
Yep. Otherwise,
same
that was
with duplication. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you. All right, so back to share here. So thank you very much again. So the forums has been updated with the new post, so you'll see it hopefully in the latest area of the OHDSI forums. But there's a link. Craig, I think, is going to send out the slides, share the slides. So these links will be in here. To get to Survey 3, you'll go to this link or find it on the forum. The forum post is also here. And it is not confined to those people who are here on the call. You can invite other people who have a friend that uses Atlas. Go ahead and just ask them to join in the fun and answer some questions about the frequency and importance of these functions that were described today. Thank you all very much for your attention.